Hello, fellow Toastmasters, and welcome to another Presentation Wizards podcast. I am your host, Peter Ward, and our topic is reaching consensus. Consensus building is important when a decision must be made that affects a group. Each person or stakeholder has a unique point of view and is impacted differently by change. During the process of reaching consensus, group members work together, form an agreement that is supported by all parties. This method of decision making promotes participation and a greater sense of ownership in both the process and the outcome. Consensus requires stakeholders to work together to build an agreement that satisfies all parties. A solution developed by consensus combines the wants and needs of all parties and seeks to avoid any major concessions by any person or persons in the group. When concessions have to be made, the decision is a compromise. A compromise requires that parties make concessions to settle on an agreement about an issue or topic. For example, team member advocates for a solution. Another team member prefers a different solution. Because they cannot agree, both members make concessions and create a new solution that combines components of both of the solutions they favored. By combining elements of both, they create a new, mutually acceptable solution. Majority rule requires a group to accept a decision agreed upon at least half the members of the team. Majority rule is oppositional. Two sides oppose each other and attempt to prove each other wrong. Winning is the goal. Not every decision requires consensus. The best reasons to reach consensus are when agreement from all or most of a group of stakeholders is required to move forward, when implementation of a decision will require a group, and when building relationships among stakeholders is as important as the decision itself. The most profound benefit of reaching consensus is the commitment of all stakeholders to the decision that has been made. By collecting input from all parties, you ensure that each person has the opportunity to express his or her thoughts and concerns. Providing for input and allowing discussion facilitates cooperation during the process of implementing any decision. In order to make a decision based on consensus, the first step is to identify the stakeholders. Internal stakeholders are club members, teammates, project leads, or volunteers who are affected by the project or topic directly. External stakeholders, such as members of the community, are those who do not work on your project but will be affected by decisions or changes made. Assemble as many internal and external stakeholders as is possible and practical. If the group is too large, you have different options. One option is to include only internal stakeholders in the decision-making group. Once a preferred course of action has been defined, submit it to external stakeholders for review and feedback. A second option is to gather a group of representatives from internal and external stakeholders and come to consensus. As with the first option, once a decision has been made, submit it to all stakeholders for review. There are many choices for coordinating a decision with a large group of stakeholders. The most effective process is the one that works best for you and a majority of your team. Once you've established your decision-making group, consider feedback from any other outside sources that will be impacted. This feedback can help you form initial opinions and identify any constraints that need to be considered. Constraints could include anything that hinders the consensus process or limits decision options, such as time, location, funding, or any element that could impact the outcome. Define how to share information with all stakeholders in a timely manner. Set expectations for communication and follow up to help avoid conflict and confusion as you move through the decision-making process. Every step needs to be communicated up to and including the implementation. Open the conversation by brainstorming ideas. During the group brainstorm, record everyone's ideas without any criticism or immediate evaluation. This keeps the atmosphere open and non-judgmental. After brainstorming, narrow your list of ideas down to possible options most appropriate to resolve the issue. Discuss each option with the group, weighing the pros and cons. Keep all feedback objective. Focus on the issue at hand and do not get sidetracked. Keep conversations positive and appropriate for the topic. In many situations, levity helps keep the atmosphere relaxed and conducive to productive discussions. If conflict arises, manage it by avoiding personal arguments or attacks. Rather than taking sides, encourage participants to express their concerns using I messages and to listen to all sides before making a decision. Shut down unproductive disagreements between group members. If a group member is disorderly or disrespectfully, calmly ask her to stop. If she continues, politely ask her to step away from the meeting. Follow this process to build consensus. Discuss all potential options and consider how each affects the stakeholders. From your list of potential solutions, determine what is most effective for each stakeholder group. When an answer from one individual or group is at odds with another, discuss the benefits and drawbacks of each potential solution. While moving through this process, identify any concerns that need to be addressed and track them until they are resolved. During the group discussion, ensure that every person has the opportunity to contribute. Some members of the group may need more time or prompting from a leader or other members to participate. As your decision is refined and options that do not fit the needs of the group are eliminated, the most challenging issues will become clear. It may be necessary to brainstorm solutions several times as concerns are raised and resolved. Consensus is reached when your group agrees on a solution. If your group is unable to reach a consensus, divide the issue into smaller problems to solve and repeat the outlined process until a majority of interested parties and stakeholders are satisfied with the result. When consensus cannot be reached, implications can be far-reaching for an organization. First and foremost, a group can stagnate. A lack of decision leaves stakeholders stuck in a holding pattern until a decision can be made. At times, a single person or a smaller group may be required to make the decision and impose it on the remaining stakeholders. Greatest challenge of imposing a solution is the lack of support from stakeholders whose opinion was either not considered or disregarded. This can lead to resentment and a failure implementation later in the process. When consensus cannot be reached, consider breaking the decision down into smaller components. Often consensus can be reached on incremental parts of a major decision. Breaking the process down in this way may be the step needed to move the process forward and reach full consensus. Deciding not to decide can be the best decision. It may be beneficial in a contentious or challenging situation to stop the conversation for the time being. Space and time can often lead to challenges in thought that will contribute to agreement at a later date and allow consensus to be reached. Now let's hear what we can learn from lynda.com about reaching consensus.
Let's start by getting something straight. Consensus is not about everyone having perfect agreement. That's beyond rare. And for busy professionals just like you, it's often not reasonable. What is reasonable is to think of consensus as meaningful agreement. And it's important. Without consensus, you risk others viewing you as too aggressive or arbitrary as a decision maker. Most people understand the importance of two-way collaboration and consensus building. Having said that, there can be an odd downside to consensus building. First, it takes time to build consensus. Any additional time spent working towards satisfying everyone and getting everybody on the same page is time spent not working on something else. Next, believe it or not, if you always make prolonged and inclusive consensus building your approach, some people will interpret that as a sign of weakness, as if you're afraid to assert yourself and make the call. Finally, don't forget, the process of consensus building will always require compromise, which means you don't get some of what you want in the final decision. So in many ways, it's about choosing when to build consensus to get the benefits while avoiding the risks I just mentioned. Here's your quick guideline to remember. You should err towards consensus building and away from fast autocratic decisions when you have ample time, the decision has a really large impact on the team, and when the team's buy-in is particularly important for decision adoption. Under those conditions, seek consensus. Now let me help you with that as well. If you remember the two tips I'm about to share, reaching agreement can be a lot easier. First, resist taking votes. Taking votes at times feels like it will speed things up, and it does, but it causes real problems. Voting puts everyone immediately into adversarial camps that just publicly proclaimed their lack of agreement with others. That's never a good mental place for a group to be, so resist voting. Next, consider adopting a decision rule to help you when you're at an impasse. Here are two classics. The first is the 70% rule. This rule states that if you're 70% bought in, you're all in and will support the majority position. Teams often use rules like this because good professionals know that 100% agreement almost never happens. Here's another great one. If you find someone objecting to the decision the majority are approaching, ask them this question. What one thing would you change in order to make this decision one you could clearly support? This is a great tactic. It makes the person focus less on objecting and more on improving the decision and puts you closer to consensus. Building consensus can be hard work, but if you choose correctly when to even try, and if you facilitate the discussion using the tips we discussed, you have a good shot at making both timely and quality decisions.